But the really interesting thing for me this time was noticing that the whole country is changing, and there's a different conversation going on in Ecuador that isn't taking place, I mean, it's taking place in bits and spurts throughout Latin America, primarily in Latin America, where there's a real new thinking about social structures, international financial structures. And just two examples. The president of Ecuador, while we were there, and Bob Curtis, who's in the group, happened to be in Ecuador at the time, ended up at a meeting at the presidential palace with a large group of people where the president of Ecuador announced formally a plan that he has, a new idea for preserving the environment, preserving cultures, and what he has said is Ecuador, there is an oil reserve in Ecuador that's considered to be approximately half of the proven reserves in the whole country. And it's always been anticipated that this reserve would get developed. And he has announced that his intention is to leave the oil in the ground under the tropical rainforest where it is. It's in a territory of indigenous lands where there are uncontacted tribes still attempting to live in voluntary isolation. It's in a national park that's one of the most biodiverse regions on Earth. And he announced publicly that his intention is to not develop the oil in the ground, to leave it in the ground, that the world has enough oil already. What it needs to preserve is its really valuable scarce resources, which is its environment. And he wants his country to launch in a new direction, and he's asking for the international community's support in doing that. And the international community's support would mean financial support, so that Ecuador can not develop oil reserves that are not needed by the world, preserve the rainforest, which is, and use the financial resources that come from the international community to launch Ecuador's economy in a new direction of sustainability, honoring the environment, addressing issues of poverty, and moving in a direction that the world knows it needs to move, and that Ecuador would be out in front in doing that. The other thing that's going on in the country is that the country has launched an initiative to rewrite its constitution. And the initiative to rewrite the constitution is a political proposal that this government was elected on. And this government, the president of the country is named Rafael Correa. It is pretty interesting because we went to this reception and I mean, there was a reception probably afterwards, a group of about this many people, and he was standing with security people around him, but the security people basically loved to hear what people were talking to him about. So he was totally accessible. People could come up and talk to him, and Bob has a great picture of the woman who runs our foundation in Ecuador, having a discussion with him where she's like, and he's listening. She's telling him what he needs to be doing, and he was really taking it all in. So it's a little different than the way we do it in this country. But one of the things he ran on was he promised constitutional reform, total rewrite from the ground floor up of the constitution of the country to create a system, to create the foundation, to put in place the foundation for a system that would create a sustainable, just, successful society. And that process has been fought pretty hard by some very powerful entrenched interests. But because the indigenous communities are totally behind this, the mestizo, the poorer communities in Ecuador are behind it, he's got 75 to 80% support for driving this initiative forward. So there is this process of constitutional reform going on, and it will be a constitutional assembly created in September, October that will meet for 6 months. And they have total powers, broad powers, to rewrite every single aspect of the Constitution if they want to do that. Obviously there's a tremendous amount of maneuvering within civil society and business to get people to get their own particular positions advanced, and it's and it's actually very chaotic, and who knows how it's gonna all work out. But people expect that the government, because it has so much power, so much support broadly, will end up with a majority of the delegates in the assembly and will have a great degree of freedom to rewrite a really innovative constitution. So one of the issues that we were looking at is, well, what are the kinds of provisions that it really makes sense to put into a constitution? And out of the work, some of the work we've been doing up here, some of the work we've been doing in Ecuador and the work we've been doing up here and the work that's come out of working on the symposium, the Awakening the Dreamer initiative, there's three initiatives that I want to just mention that our organization and several other organizations that we're working with are trying to figure out how to get into the Constitutional Assembly process. And they're sort of basic foundation level issues. One of the initiatives is an initiative around creating legal rights for the environment. So at a very fundamental level, in our legal system, and this comes from an attorney here in the U.S. has been working on some of these issues, an environmental attorney who at some point had a realization, you know, we think we're going to use the law to protect the environment. And he'd been working for years using the law, the legal system. We use the legal system, we can protect the environment. What he discovered was you can't possibly use the legal system to protect the environment because the environment doesn't exist in the legal system, in our system of laws. Our system of laws is a system of laws based on giving rights to people. And rights to people, generally when they translate into relationships with the environment, turn the environment into property, which is something that everything is on the side of legal systems for persons. Persons being both natural persons, and in our system, persons ends up being non-natural or corporations. And the basic legal system doesn't have any rights for the environment. It sounds like such a silly thing. Well, you can't give a right to a tree. I mean, the legal is about us. People, but if you look deeply at what we've been looking at and what the symposium talks about in terms of environmental sustainability, social justice, spiritual fulfillment, and the integration of those all into something, there's a recognition that there clearly is some holistic system that we're talking about, and you really can't separate humans' well-being from environment. Environment needs to have protection. So this man has written a whole series of approaches to how you build into the legal system, which he's been trying to do now in the United States. And he's starting at municipal levels, township levels, working in state governments and trying to work up into national government around an initiative to get like a Bill of Rights for nature or for the environment. And when he heard that Ecuador was writing a constitution from ground zero, his idea was, Jesus, what a phenomenal opportunity. The second issue that, if you know, those of you who know Tom Lindsay, know one of the main issues he's been working on is limiting corporate rights in the U.S. legal system. And in the U.S. legal system, I mean, there's a real specific thing where corporations have gradually, or inch by inch or mile by mile, gotten the rights that are ascribed for persons in our legal system and in our Constitution. Corporations have maneuvered themselves in to get themselves to be considered persons under the Constitution. And with personhood, there's a tremendous number of rights that are available and mainly embedded in free speech rights. And spending money is considered an exercise of free speech. So a lot of the freedom and power that is vested in corporations in the United States now, the disproportionate power comes from the fact that they're considered persons under the Constitution with rights of free speech and rights of protections of the Bill of Rights. And it's created, in his analysis, a total skewing of democracy, concentration of power, and that's what he's been working on, trying to unwind that in the United States. Having the opportunity to paint from an empty canvas, such as Ecuador is looking at doing, he's really interested in participating with Ecuador in the same issues. There's a whole nother area having to do with currency, money, the whole system of money. Ecuador is a really interesting situation now. It doesn't have a currency anymore. It abandoned its own internal currency in 2000, I think it was, and uses the US dollar. And there's some of you may be familiar with, but there's a lot of really useful work that's been done around the world looking at money, the system of money. My wife has done some work looking at the soul. She's looking at the soul of money. Some people would say, and I think very well-informed people would say, that one of the main functions of a money system clearly is to facilitate exchange, but the money system we use is a tool of empire. It's really a tool. The design of the money system we have in this world, centrally issued, debt-related, interest tied into money, is a tool of domination, control, and empire. And Ecuador is so there's people who we've been working with and are interested in this whole issue of money, where Ecuador has the possibility of, because it doesn't have a currency, because it's writing a constitution, it used to have a currency, the possibility of creating a set of legal structures that allow for different mediums of exchange to facilitate people's participation in commerce and trade and sharing is possible to build into their constitutional system. And that's another issue that we're engaging with and been talking with people down there who are very interested in the idea. It sounds novel and naive or radical, but there's some really fundamental writings and analysis that's been done that if we're going to ever create a sustainable society that doesn't have an imperative of economic growth built into it, the money system will have to change. That the money system we have drives that, subverts attempts to change that, and starting to work at a very fundamental level with our money system is something that we will have to do.